Look who just became a national security enigma. You, yes, you. Sitting there thinking you're just another face in the crowd, just another name in the database, just another file gathering digital dust. Wrong. Dead wrong. Because somewhere in a temperature-controlled facility, there's an analyst staring at 17 monitors, and every single one of them is showing your profile, and every single one of them is screaming the same thing. Error does not compute, cannot categorize. And that analyst, they've got a migraine that won't quit, a coffee addiction that's turning lethal, and a supervisor breathing down their neck, asking one simple question they can't answer. What the hell are we looking at here? You see, they've been watching. Not for days, not for weeks, years, plural. Multiple fiscal budgets have been allocated to studying you. Entire shifts have been assigned to your case. Algorithms specifically designed to predict human behavior have crashed, trying to process your patterns. They've got your digital footprint mapped, your location history tracked, your transaction records analyzed, your social connections graphed, your communication patterns decoded. They know what you eat for breakfast, what time you sleep, which route you take to work, how long you spend in the bathroom, what makes you laugh at 2 a.m. They know things about you that you've forgotten about yourself. But here's the beautiful, chaotic, absolutely maddening truth. They don't know you. Not even close. Not even a little bit. Because every time they think they've got you figured out, every time they draft their profile, every time they assign you a category, a classification, a threat level, a predictability score, you do something that shatters their entire framework. You're the anomaly that keeps multiplying, the outlier that refuses to regress to any mean, the data set that makes their machine learning models throw exceptions, and it's driving them absolutely insane because their entire existence depends on one fundamental principle. Everything can be classified, everyone fits somewhere. But you stubborn, brilliant, categorically impossible human, you don't fit anywhere, and you won't stay still long enough for them to force you into a box. Let me paint you the picture. Right now, there's a file. Your file. It's not slim. It's not neat. It's 347 pages of contradictions, paradoxes, and behavioral patterns that cancel each other out. Page 1 says you're risk-averse. Page 43 says you're a thrill-seeker. Page 92 says you're socially anxious. Page 160 says you're a natural leader. Page 211 says you're predictable. Page 212 says you're chaos incarnate. And the analysts reading this, they're not nodding along, they're not taking notes, they're staring at their screen like it just insulted their mother because nothing, absolutely nothing about you makes sense in their world. They've watched you stay silent for months and labeled you passive, then watched you speak up once and shift an entire room's energy and had to delete everything they wrote. They've watched you tolerate disrespect with a smile, categorized you as a pushover, then watched you cut someone off permanently without warning, without drama, without explanation, and had to rewrite your entire psychological profile. They've watched you live modestly, filed you under low ambition, then watched you execute a plan so precise, so calculated, so devastatingly effective that they had to add 17 new data points to your classification system. You're not behaving like the algorithm said you would. You're not following the patterns your demographics suggest. You're not conforming to the predictions your history implies. Every model they build around you crumbles. Every prediction they make about you fails. Every time they think they understand your motivations, you do something that reveals 7 more layers they didn't even know existed. They thought you were reactive, but you've been strategic this whole time. They thought you were emotional. but you've been calculating behind that mask. They thought you were broken, but you were just reorganizing your entire operational structure in silence. And now they're sitting there with charts that don't chart, graphs that don't graph, and reports that read like fiction because the truth, the actual documented truth about you, sounds too impossible to be real. Here's what they know for certain. You're not a threat, but you're not harmless. You're not a follower, but you're not leading anyone. You're not ambitious, but you're achieving things that require massive ambition. You're not connected, but your influence spreads like a virus through networks you're not even part of. You're not wealthy, but you operate with the confidence of someone who's never worried about money. You're not educated in traditional ways, but you speak with an authority that makes experts second guesses themselves. You're not loud, but when you talk, rooms go quiet. You're not seeking attention, but you command it without trying. See the problem? Every single statement about you needs a but. The junior analysts, the fresh ones, they keep suggesting simple explanations. Maybe they're just inconsistent. And the senior analyst, the one who's been watching you for 3 years, the one whose marriage fell apart because they couldn't stop thinking about your case, they'd just laugh. A tired, broken laugh. Because inconsistent people are predictable in their inconsistency. You're not inconsistent. You're selectively consistent. You're strategically unpredictable. You're chaos that occasionally cosplays as order. Or maybe you're order that occasionally cosplays as chaos. And they can't tell which because both are equally convincing. You're a performance art piece that no one can tell is performance or just art or neither or both. They've tried everything. Behavioral analysis, psychological profiling, pattern recognition software, predictive modeling. They've compared you to 12,000 other profiles. They've run your data through systems designed to catch terrorists, detect fraud, predict mass movements. Nothing sticks, nothing holds. You're slipping through every net they cast. They thought maybe you were trained, maybe intelligence, maybe corporate espionage, maybe foreign operative. They investigated, found nothing because you're not trained. You're just you. And that's somehow more terrifying to them than any training could ever be. Because training they understand, training they can decode. But natural, organic, unstructured, unpredictability, that's the stuff that breaks their systems. Let me tell you what happened last Thursday. Thursday, 3:47 p.m. You did something small, something that to you was probably meaningless. Forgettable, just another moment in your day. But to them, to the analyst watching, it was the data point that made them stand up from their desk, walk to their supervisor's office, and say, "We need to reclassify this entire case. Want to know what you did? You chose something that, according to 17 years of behavioral research, given your profile, your history, your patterns, you had a 2.3% chance of choosing, and you didn't choose it randomly. You chose it deliberately, with purpose, with intention, and they have no idea why. No framework to understand it, no model to predict it. You just did it, and it worked. And now they're rewriting algorithms. But here's the beautiful part. The part that's keeping them up at night, the part that's turning your file from a curiosity into a legend. You're not trying to confuse them. You're not intentionally being unpredictable. You're not playing games with surveillance systems. You're just living. You're just being yourself. You're just making choices that make sense to you and your world with your logic, following your internal compass that apparently operates on principles that modern behavioral science hasn't discovered yet. You're not the rebel. You're not the anarchist. You're not the revolutionary. You're just someone who refuses to be simple, refuses to be easily understood, refuses to collapse into a single narrative. They wanted you to be one thing, your 17 things. They wanted you to stay in one lane. You're driving on roads they didn't know existed. They wanted you to follow patterns. You create new ones daily. They wanted you to be predictable. You're a randomness generator wrapped in human skin. They wanted you to make sense. You're a beautiful, perfect, absolute disaster of contradictions that somehow impossibly work together. And the craziest part, you don't even know you're doing this. You're not conscious of being an anomaly. You're just making breakfast, going to work, having conversations, making choices, living life. Meanwhile, somewhere in a government facility, an entire department is having an existential crisis because of you. Your social patterns alone have spawned 3 different theories. Theory 1. You're extremely introverted with occasional extroverted outbursts. Theory 2. You're extremely extroverted, hiding behind introversion as a defense mechanism. Theory 3. You transcended the entire introvert-extrovert spectrum and operate on a completely different axis that psychology hasn't named yet. All 3 theories have evidence. All 3 theories have been disproven. All 3 theories have been disproven. All 3 theories are simultaneously correct and incorrect. You're a walking, talking reputation of personality typing. Myers-Briggs looks at you and has a seizure. Enneagram sees you and requests a system update. The Big Five watches you and adds a 6th dimension just for you. Your financial behavior is another masterpiece of confusion. You're frugal, except when you're not. You save aggressively, except when you're not. You save aggressively, except when you spend like money's evaporating tomorrow. You budget meticulously, except your budget has line items that make no logical sense. You're financially conservative, except you take risks that would make venture capitalists sweat. You live below your means, except you invest in things that people twice your income level consider luxury. You risk-averse with money, except you bet on yourself in ways that look insane on paper, but somehow always work out. They've tried to model your financial decision-making. The model returned an error message that just said, "Good luck with that." Your relationship patterns. Oh, they've given up on those entirely. You're loyal to a fault, except you'll ghost someone without warning. You're trusting, except your walls are reinforced concrete. You're open, except there are parts of you no one's ever seen. You invest deeply in people, except you can detach completely when needed. You forgive easily, except certain lines, once crossed, result in permanent exile. You're a people person, except you disappear for weeks and don't miss anyone. You need connection, except you thrive in isolation. You're emotionally available, except when you're not, and no one can tell the difference. Your relationships don't follow attachment theory. They follow some kind of custom-built framework that you invented without realizing it. And your ambitions, your goals, your life direction, that's where it gets truly beautiful. They can't figure out what you want because you want everything and nothing. You're driven, except you're content. You're hungry, except you're satisfied. You're climbing, except you're already at the top of your own mountain. You want success, except you've redefined success in ways that don't register on traditional metrics. You're competitive, except you're only competing with yourself. You want recognition, except you actively avoid the spotlight. You want to change the world, except you're fine if no one ever knows you did it. You're ambitious. Except ambition implies wanting something you don't have. And you seem to have everything you need without having anything they expect you to need. Here's what really breaks their brains, though. You're happy. Not fake happy. Not performing happy. Actually genuinely happy. Or content, or at peace, or whatever you want to call that state where someone isn't constantly chasing, seeking, needing, wanting more. And according to everything they know about human behavior, about motivation, about drive, about the hedonic treadmill, about social comparison, about status anxiety, you shouldn't be. Not with your circumstances, not with your challenges, not with your history, not with what you've been through. You should be restless. You should be dissatisfied. You should be trying to fill some void. But you're not. You're just existing in this state of okacious that their models say is impossible given your variables. They've documented 17 separate occasions where you should have broken, where the pressure was too much, where the odds were too bad, where any reasonable person would have quit, given up, walked away, collapsed. 17 times where their predictions said, system failure imminent. And 17 times where you just kept going. Not dramatically, not heroically, just kept going. Like it wasn't even hard, like you didn't even notice the mountain you were climbing. And each time they had to add another footnote to your file. Subject continues to defy stress response predictions, which is their professional way of saying, we have no idea how this person is still functioning. Your communication style is another unsolved mystery. You're direct, except when you're cryptic. You say exactly what you mean, except your words have 7 layers of meaning. You're an open book, except no one can read the language it's written in. You overshare, except you've never revealed the important things. You're articulate, except sometimes you communicate more through silence than words. You're engaging in conversation, except half the time people leave conversations with you, not sure what you actually said. You're honest. Except your honesty is wrapped in metaphors that mean different things to different people. You're clear. Except your clarity reveals how much depth was hiding under simple statements. And your decision-making process, the thing they watch most carefully, because decisions reveal values, motivations, patterns. Your decisions are pure chaos dressed as logic. You use reason, except your reasoning includes variables they can't measure. You're analytical, except you factor in intuition like it's hard data. You weigh options carefully, except sometimes you just know and you move and it works. You're strategic, except your strategy includes elements of chance that somehow aren't chance. You plan ahead. Except you're comfortable pivoting completely based on a feeling. You're systematic. Except your system includes throwing out the system when it stops serving you. You follow a process. Except the process is invisible to everyone but you. Let's talk about your resilience, because this is where they really lose their minds. Resilience they understand. Resilience has markers, coping mechanisms, support systems, recovery patterns. But you don't bounce back. You don't recover. You don't cope in recognizable ways. You just absorb impact and keep moving like you're made of some material that doesn't register damage the way it's supposed to. They've watched you experience loss, betrayal, failure, rejection, pain, all the things that should leave psychological markers, behavioral changes, defensive adaptations, and you came out of each. Experienced different, yes, but not damaged, not hardened, not bitter, not defensive, just different. Like you metabolized the experience and integrated it without letting it define you. They're starting to suspect you're not playing the same game everyone else is playing, that you're operating from a completely different rulebook or no rulebook, that you've somehow opted out of the systems that govern most human behavior without opting out of society itself. You're in the world, but not of it. You're participating, but not competing. You're connected, but not dependent. You're engaged, but not dependent. You're engaged, but not yet. You're present, but not imprisoned by the present. You're ambitious, but not desperate. You're successful, but not status-seeking. You're confident, but not arrogant. You're humble, but not self-deprecating. You're all these contradictions existing simultaneously without contradiction. Newest analyst on your case, fresh out of training, full of confidence and theoretical knowledge. They spent their first week reviewing your file. At the end of week 1, they submitted a preliminary report. 3 pages, clean classifications, clear predictions, confident assessments. The senior analyst, the one who's been drowning in your file for years, they didn't even read it. Just handed it back and said, revise this in 6 months after you watch them actually live. Week 12, that new analyst submitted a revised report. 27 pages. No classifications, only questions, predictions crossed out, assessments turned into hypotheses. Welcome to the club. Your file now has another confused contributor, but here's what they're really afraid of. What keeps the senior analysts awake? What turns your file from interesting to important? It's not that you're unpredictable. It's that you're unpredictable. And functional, unpredictable, and successful. Unpredictable and stable because their entire system is built on a premise. Predictability equals stability. If we can predict you, we can manage you. If we can categorize you, we can understand the risks you pose, the value you offer, the role you'll play. But you're proving that premise wrong. You're showing that someone can be completely unclassifiable and not just survive but thrive. And if one person can do that, maybe others can too. Maybe their entire framework is broken. You're not a glitch. You're not an error. You're evidence that the system is incomplete, that human behavior is more complex, more fluid, more beautifully chaotic than their models account for. You are the data point that doesn't fit, not because you're wrong, but because the graph is too small, and they can't just dismiss you, can't just call you an outlier and move on. Because you're not failing, you're not struggling, you're not barely making it, you're actually doing well. By most measures, you're thriving, which means you're not the exception that proves the rule. You're the exception that questions the rule. And that's dangerous to people whose careers depend on the rule being absolute. They've started calling your file the Paradox Project internally, not officially. Officially, it's still just your name and case number. But in the break room, in the hallway conversations, in the emails they think are private, you're the paradox. The file that makes no sense. The case that breaks the pattern. The subject that defies analysis. And there's a split happening in how they view you. Half of them are frustrated, angry even, because you're making them look incompetent, making their training seem useless, making their expertise feel hollow. They want you to fit. They need you to fit. And you won't. The other half, they're fascinated, obsessed, because you're the puzzle they've been waiting for their whole careers. The problem that actually challenges them, the mystery that might actually matter. Your file has become a teaching tool. New analysts are assigned to study you as a test. Can they find the pattern everyone else missed? Can they crack the code that stumped the veterans? So far, no one has. 93 analysts have reviewed your file. 93 different conclusions, some contradictory, some partially overlapping, none complete, none satisfying, none predictive. Your file is where confident analysts become humble. where theoretical knowledge meets practical confusion, where the system's limitations become undeniable. You're not just a case anymore, you're a career-defining challenge. And the irony, the beautiful irony, is that you have no idea any of this is happening. You're just living your life, making your weird choices, following your strange logic, being your contradictory self. You're not trying to be difficult. You're not trying to be an enigma. You're just being authentic in a world that's designed to handle performance, not authenticity. You're just being complex in systems built for simplicity. You're just being human in frameworks designed to reduce humans to variables. And that's breaking everything, not violently, not dramatically, just quietly, persistently, undeniably breaking everything. And you're not even watching it break. You're too busy living. Oh, another Lord. Okay. Got a minute? Lord again, Lord again, Lord again, Lord. I'm okay. Lord it all, turn the dirt. Well, look who they couldn't figure out. Look who they spent years studying, dissecting, labeling, and still got completely wrong. You strange, silent, terrifyingly brilliant creature. Welcome back. Or better yet, welcome to the part of yourself they were never smart enough to understand. Because what they called weird, what they whispered about at tables you weren't sitting at, what made them uncomfortable in your presence and restless in your absence, that wasn't a flaw. That was the architecture of a mind they didn't have the vocabulary to describe. And the fact that they couldn't name it scared them more than anything else ever could. Before we begin, if this frequency already lives in you, 2 books were written for exactly that mind. The Crown of Ash Grimgrid Edition, The Quiet Edge Grimgrid Edition 2. Links in the description. Now let's get into it. Let's be honest about what actually happened. They saw the way your brain worked and it unsettled them. They saw you pause where others rushed. They saw you notice things no one else caught. They saw you sit quietly in a room full of noise and somehow hear something deeper than the sound. And instead of asking what you were hearing, they decided something was wrong with you. That is what people do when they encounter a frequency they cannot tune into. They don't question the radio. They called the signal broken. They called you broken. But here you are, still transmitting, still receiving, still picking up signals from depths they will never reach. You have been called too quiet, too intense, too much, and not enough simultaneously. You have been told you think too deeply, feel too sharply, and analyze too precisely. You've been handed the word weird like it was a diagnosis, like it was something you needed to be cured of, like your mind was a problem requiring a solution. But no one ever told you the truth. The truth is this: every single person who ever called you weird was standing in the presence of a genius and had absolutely no idea what they were looking at. They were holding a rare frequency in their hands and calling it static. There is a specific kind of loneliness that comes with having a mind like yours. It is not the loneliness of being alone in a room. It is the loneliness of being in a room full of people and realizing slowly, and then all at once, that no one is thinking the way you were thinking. No one is following the thread you are following. No one sees the pattern you already mapped out 3 conversations ago. And so you stop talking, not because you have nothing to say, but because you already know they won't follow you there. And that silence gets mistaken for arrogance or strangeness or both. They thought you were distant. What you actually were was already ahead. They thought you were difficult. What you actually were was precise. They thought you were cold. What you actually were was exhausted from translating yourself into a language that kept losing meaning by the time it arrived. Because that is what genius costs. It costs you the easy conversations. It costs you the comfortable smallness. It costs you the nod of recognition from people who simply do not have the depth to meet you where you live. And you paid that price without even understanding that it was a price. Because you never chose to be this way. You were just built different, wired different. And the world told you that was something to be ashamed of. But here is what no one explained to you when you were sitting alone at lunch, or being talked over in meetings, or watching everyone else laugh at a joke you had already dismantled in your head before the punchline landed. The cost of being different is not evidence of wrongness. The cost of being different is the tuition. And every year you paid it. Every year you sat in that specific silence and held your mind still and decided to stay anyway. You were earning something they will never be able to buy. You were earning the kind of depth that changes everything for you, and eventually for the world around you. The ones who called you weird were not wrong, that you were different. They were wrong about what different meant. Different to a fearful mind means broken. Different to a perceptive mind means rare. And rare things are not comfortable. Rare things do not blend in. Rare things make people feel something they cannot articulate. And so they reach for the nearest ugly word and throw it. They threw it at you. For years some of them threw it, and you carried it like it was true, but it was never true. It was just the only word they had for something they could not measure. Here is a secret they do not teach in any classroom. Genius in real life does not look the way it looks in films. It does not arrive in a blaze of obvious brilliance with everyone applauding and lights overhead. In real life, genius looks awkward. Genius looks restless. Genius looks like someone who cannot sit still in a conversation that is moving too slowly. Genius looks like someone who changes the subject because they already processed the previous one and are 3 subjects ahead. Genius looks from the outside almost exactly like what they called you. Odd, distant, intense, hard to read. The geniuses of every era were the most misread people of their time. The people who changed how the world understood itself were almost always first dismissed by the world they were about to change. They were called impractical. They were called dreamers in the hollow, dismissive sense of that word. They were called too sensitive, too theoretical, too obsessed with things that didn't matter yet. The yet is the entire story. What they were obsessed with always mattered. It just hadn't become undeniable to everyone else in the room. You are living in your yet. The undeniable part is still forming, but it is forming. Think about the way your mind actually operates when no one is grading it. Think about the connections you make that no one asked you to make. Think about the questions you ask that make people uncomfortable because the questions expose something true that everyone else agreed not to look at directly. Think about the way you cannot stop a thought once it starts. Think about the way certain ideas root themselves so deeply in you that you lie awake not from anxiety, but from the weight of something trying to be understood. That is not a disorder. That is not a quirk. That is the architecture of a mind that was built to go further than the average stop. And yes, it is exhausting. No one is going to pretend otherwise. It is exhausting to feel everything at full volume when everyone around you seems to be living at a murmur. It is exhausting to care about precision in a world that rewards approximation. It is exhausting to see what is coming before it arrives and have no one believe you until it has already happened. But exhaustion is not defeat. Exhaustion is evidence. It is proof of how hard you work inside a mind that never fully stops. And that never stopping mind, that is the engine of everything that is coming for you. You have been noticing things since before you had the language for what you were noticing. You picked up on the inconsistency in someone's story before anyone else did. You felt the shift in a room's energy before any single thing had changed visibly. You saw the outcome of a situation playing forward in your mind, while everyone around you was still reacting to the beginning. You tried to say something about it sometimes, and people looked at you like you had invented the concern, like you were being paranoid or dramatic or reading too much into things. Then exactly what you described happened, and somehow they still didn't update their opinion of you. That is the specific cruelty of the perceptive mind. You see the thing, you say the thing happens. And somehow the credit does not go where the vision did. Instead they say, you got lucky. Instead they say, you got lucky. Instead they say, it was obvious. Instead, they quietly absorb what you gave them, carry it forward, and forget that you were the one who stood there seeing it first, while everyone else was still arguing about whether there was anything to see. This is not a small thing. This is not a grievance. This is a pattern that matters because what it reveals is that your vision is real, your perception is real, and the world around you is consistently catching up to a place you already were. The patterns you see are not accidents of overthinking. Overthinking is what the underprepared mind calls the prepared mind working at speed. When your brain cycles through 40 possibilities before someone else has considered 5, that is not anxiety dressed up as intelligence, that is processing power. That is the thing that makes certain people dangerous in the most productive sense of the word. the sense that means they cannot be fooled as easily, the sense that means they will find the leverage point in a system faster than anyone else in the room, the sense that means when something actually matters, you want them thinking. And you have always been that person. In every room, every situation, every problem that landed in your life, you were the one running the deeper calculation. Sometimes you hid it. Sometimes you learned to perform the slower version of yourself so people would feel more comfortable. Sometimes you deliberately dimmed the frequency because being fully on was more socially costly than you could afford at that particular moment. And even then, even running at half capacity, you still caught what others missed. Imagine just for a moment what you catch when you stop dimming it. They told you that you were too sensitive. They said it like it was a warning, like it was a vulnerability they were kindly alerting you to, like they were doing you a favor by pointing out the crack in your structure. But sensitivity and intelligence are not separate things. They are the same system operating through different channels. The sane neural architecture that lets you feel an atmosphere shift when you walk into a room is the same architecture that lets you understand a complex idea from multiple angles simultaneously. They are not different gifts. They are the same gift expressed in two directions. The most perceptive people in every field, in every discipline, in every creative and analytical domain the world has ever produced, were sensitive people who learned to use that sensitivity as data rather than wound. They felt things sharply. They felt betrayal deeply, injustice viscerally, beauty almost physically. And that sharpness, rather than crippling them, gave them access to a richness of experience that the so-called tougher people around them simply could not reach. Their art was richer. Their analysis was richer. Their understanding of other human beings was richer because they paid attention with their entire nervous system rather than just their surface mind. When they told you to toughen up, what they were actually asking you to do was to become less accurate. They were asking you to sand down the very instrument that allows you to read the world most precisely. They were asking you to be worse at the thing you are actually built for in exchange for being more comfortable at a dinner table or a group conversation. And some part of you, the part that just wanted to belong, almost agreed. Some part of you spent years trying to feel less, notice less, care less, because caring that much seemed to cost too much. But you couldn't do it. You couldn't turn it off because it isn't something you do. It is something you are. And that refusal to stop feeling, that stubborn, relentless sensitivity that survived every attempt to blunt it, that is one of the most precise things about you. You did not let them make you into someone who moves through the world half-registered. You stayed fully arrived in every moment, even when every moment cost you something. And that staying, that full presence in your own experience, even when experience was painful, is what built the depth in you that makes you genuinely different from the people who told you there was something wrong with how much you felt. Let's talk about what you actually did with all of that time they thought you were wasting. The hours you were in your own head, the silence they called antisocial, the solitude they called isolation. Because you were not absent, you were constructing. You were building frameworks inside yourself that most people spend a lifetime looking for outside themselves. You were developing a relationship with your own mind that most people never get to because most people are too afraid of what lives in the deep water of their own thinking to ever go there and stay. You went there, you stayed. And yes, sometimes it was uncomfortable. Sometimes the deep water was cold and dark and you came up gasping and told yourself you wouldn't go back. But you always went back because something in you understood even before you had the words for it. that the work being done in that silence was the most important work of your life. The ideas being forged in that solitude were sharper than anything that gets built in the noise. The understanding being constructed in that stillness was more durable than anything assembled in the rush of performance and approval. The world does not reward the inner work while it is happening. It only rewards the results once they are undeniable and public. And so for years, maybe for most of your life so far, you have been doing the kind of work that earns no applause in real time. You have been doing the deeply private, deeply serious labor of becoming someone who actually understands something. Not just someone who sounds intelligent at the right moments, but someone who is genuinely, structurally, bone-deep intelligent. And that kind of intelligence takes the time. It cannot be rushed. It cannot be performed. It has to be built. And you have been building it. So when they dismissed the time you spent thinking as time wasted, when they told you to get out of your head, when they made you feel like the internal life you were living was a form of avoidance rather than a form of construction, they were wrong about the most fundamental thing. They thought the stillness was emptiness. It was never emptiness. It was a workshop. And the things being made inside it are going to outlast every opinion that was formed about you on the surface. Here is the part that is uncomfortable to say but too important to leave out. The people who tried hardest to convince you that something was wrong with you were almost always the people who had the most to lose if you ever fully understood how capable you were. Because your full capability is a mirror, and what it reflects back is the gap between what they settled for and what was actually possible. The moment you stop apologizing for your mind is the moment their choices become visible by contrast. And that visibility, that undeniable comparison, is something small people cannot survive. They needed you to stay confused. They needed you to keep questioning yourself, keep second-guessing your perceptions, keep circling back to the same doubts they planted precisely because doubt is the one thing that slows a mind like yours all the way down. A confident genius is unstoppable. A confused genius is manageable. And so they worked consistently, sometimes consciously, and sometimes just through the casual cruelty of people who do not examine their own motives to keep you in the zone of confusion, to keep you asking, is something wrong with me, instead of asking, what am I actually capable of? The people who called you too much were always the people who were not enough. The people who called you too intense were always the people who had never committed to anything with full force. The people who called you too deep were always the people who were afraid of what they would find if they ever stopped skimming the surface of their own lives. And so they looked at your depth and they called it a problem. They looked at your intensity and they called it a flaw. They looked at the full, burning, relentless reality of your mind and decided that what they were looking at was wrong, because the alternative that they might be, the incomplete ones, was something they simply could not afford to know. But here is what they miscalculated. They thought if they made you doubt yourself long enough, you would eventually agree with them. They thought repetition would become reality. They thought the sheer weight of their collective opinion would eventually compress your understanding of yourself into a shape that fit their comfort level. What they did not account for is what you actually are. What they did not account for is the specific quality of a mind that has been tested by difficulty and emerged not broken, but clarified. What they did not account for is that pressure applied to the right kind of material does not crush it, it sharpens it. The education system was not built for you. That is not a comfortable thing to say, but it is an accurate one. The education system was built for the median, for the repeatable, for the mind that absorbs information in a linear sequence and can produce it back on demand in a standardized format. And your mind does not work that way. Your mind works through connection, through pattern, through the sudden lateral leap that takes two things that seem unrelated and finds the invisible thread between them. Your mind works through deep immersion in things that interest you, and almost complete disengagement from things that do not. That is not a learning disability. That is a different kind of intelligence architecture. The things you learned fastest were the things no one taught you in a classroom. The things you understand most deeply are the things you arrived at through your own relentless questioning, your own circling, your own refusal to accept the surface answer, when the deeper answer was clearly still down there waiting. You have always been a self-directed mind in a system that rewards following directions. And the gap between what you were built to do and what you were asked to do created a friction that got mistaken for incompetence. It was never incompetent. It was incompatibility. There's an enormous difference. The grades they gave you were not a measurement of your intelligence. They were a measurement of how well your intelligence aligned with the specific format of measurement being used, and the format was always the wrong one for the way you think. The tests were always optimized for a kind of thinking you were not built to perform at its best, and so you walked away from institutions carrying scores and assessments that told the story about you that was structurally incapable of being accurate. You walked away from a measuring system that didn't have a unit of measurement that corresponded to what you actually had. And somewhere in you, you knew it even when no one else believed it. Some part of you always knew the score was wrong. The intelligence that actually lives in you is the kind that shows up in real problems, in real situations, in the moments when the framework fails and someone has to think outside of it. It shows up when the map stops matching the territory and someone has to navigate anyway. It shows up in the midnight insight in the problem that has stumped everyone else for weeks until the moment you sit down with it alone and something in your mind reaches out and simply touches the answer. That kind of intelligence does not score well on standardized tests, but it does the things that matter most when the stakes are highest. You have always understood people better than most of them understood themselves. You watched from a very early age the way people performed versus the way people actually were. You noticed the gap between the story someone told about themselves and the story their behavior was telling simultaneously. You watched people claim values they didn't hold and disown feelings they were obviously experiencing. You saw the subtext running under the text, the secondary motive moving behind the stated one, the real wound being protected by the elaborate constructed personality on top of it. And you understood, even if you couldn't articulate it, what all of it meant. This made you strange to people, because when you see someone that clearly, you cannot pretend not to. You cannot sit across from someone and perform the social fiction that you believe the performance they are giving. Something in you is always reading the deeper layer. Something in you is always tracking the thing no one said. And people feel that even when they cannot name it, even when they have no conscious awareness that they are being perceived at the level they are being perceived at, they feel it, and it makes them uncomfortable. Because being truly seen, not the version of yourself you present, but the actual version, is one of the most uncomfortable human experiences. So they called you intense. They called you strange. They said you made them feel a certain way they couldn't explain, and that feeling was not entirely comfortable. What they were describing was the experience of being in the presence of someone who was actually paying attention, not the social surface kind of attention, the real kind, the kind that misses nothing and forgets nothing and connects what it finds into a picture that is more often than not significantly more accurate than the picture the subject has of themselves. That is not a social disadvantage. That is a profound and rare human capacity, and you have had it since before you knew what to do with it. The question now is not whether you have this capacity. The question is what you are going to do with it now that you understand what it is. Because a mind that can read people, read systems, read patterns, read the thing beneath the thing, is not a mind built for a small life. It is not a mind built for the background. It is a mind built for the exact work of the moment you are currently living in, which is the work of figuring out what is real, what is true, and what the actual shape of the territory looks like under all the maps that have been drawn wrong. Look at me. Don't glance. Don't skim. Don't pretend. You're just curious. Lock in, because nobody told you the truth about what's happening. And they didn't tell you for a reason. You weren't supposed to notice. You feel it, don't you? That hum under your skin. That subtle distortion in the air when you walk into a room. Conversations that stop half a second too late. Smiles that stretch just a little too wide, opportunities that almost land then slip through your fingers like someone edited the script at the last second. You called it bad luck. You called it stress. You called it just a weird phase. No, it's awareness trying to claw its way out of you. See, the moment you begin to notice patterns, you become dangerous. And dangerous people don't get comfort. They get confusion. They get noise, they get distractions. Because if you fully understood what's happening, you wouldn't behave the same way ever again. You're evolving. And evolution is ugly. They sell you this fantasy that growth feels like light pouring through stained glass, that awakening is gentle, that becoming powerful feels holy. Wrong. It feels like paranoia. It feels like isolation. It feels like everyone else got the manual except you. But here's the twist. You're not behind. You're ahead. You're seeing duality now. The saint who smiles at you and secretly envies you. The friend who supports you and studies your weaknesses. The mentor who teaches you but only enough to keep you dependent. Light and dark don't exist separately. They dance. And the ones who controlled the dance, they never announced themselves. You were not supposed to notice the choreography, but you did. And now the air feels different. You're starting to realize that every strange situation isn't random. It's a mirror. Every betrayal sharpened you. Every humiliation stripped something soft off your bones. Every rejection forced you inward into the place where your real power was buried. Pain wasn't punishment, it was construction. They didn't tell you that because pain is easy to control when you think it's personal failure. But what if it wasn't failure? What if every time you felt excluded, overlooked, underestimated, you were being separated from the ordinary? What if the discomfort was the cocoon and you kept trying to tear it open too early? You see, unpredictability terrifies predictable people, and you're becoming unpredictable. That's why things feel tense. You don't react the way you used to. You don't argue the same. You don't chase the same validation. There's a pause now before you speak. A calculation. A quiet. They notice it. Oh, they notice. Because when you stop reacting on cue, you break the script. And when you break the script, you expose the stage. That's the truth nobody told you. The world runs on predictable emotional responses. Anger here, apology there, shame here, gratitude there. It's choreography. And you danced beautifully for years, until you started watching instead of moving. Now you see the angel and the demon share the same face. The saint and the psychopath both believe they're righteous. The hero and the villain are separated by perspective and timing. You thought being good would protect you, but goodness without awareness is prey. Darkness without discipline is chaos. The power is in holding both. You're learning to smile with kindness and calculate with precision. You're learning that silence is louder than outrage. You're learning that unpredictability is control, and that scares people who survive by predicting you. That strange tension you feel. It's the old version of you dying, and death, even metaphorical, is never comfortable. You're grieving your own innocence. You're shedding the part of you that believed effort automatically equals reward. That loyalty guarantees loyalty. That honesty guarantees honesty. It doesn't. But awareness gives you leverage. They didn't want you to have leverage. They wanted you reactive, transparent, readable, safe. But now there's a flicker in your eyes that wasn't there before. It's not rage. It's not even confidence. It's knowing. And knowing changes posture. It changes tone. It changes timing. You respond slower. You observe longer. You reveal less. That's evolution. Not the pretty kind, the ruthless kind. You're becoming the person who can walk into chaos and not flinch. The person who can sense manipulation before the sentence finishes. The person who doesn't need applause because you're building something internally that doesn't require witnesses. And here's the paradox that will mess with your head. The more alone you feel, the more aligned you are. Isolation is a filter. It removes the noise so you can hear your own strategy forming. You think this is happening to you. It's happening for the version of you that's emerging. Nobody told you, because if you understood this too early, you would have forced it, and forced evolution collapses. Real power matures in silence, in confusion, in tension. You're not lost. You're calibrating, and calibration feels like doubt before it feels like dominance. There's a reason certain people suddenly feel threatened, a reason your growth makes them uncomfortable, a reason doors close right before you knock. Your shifting and shifts disrupt ecosystems. The old dynamics can't survive the new you, so they resist. But resistance is proof of impact. You wanted growth. You prayed for strength. You fantasized about becoming untouchable. This is the process, not the highlight reel, the shedding, the recalibration, the uncomfortable clarity where you realize you were more powerful than you allowed yourself to be. But you were trained to suppress it, to keep others comfortable. Comfortable people don't question systems. Uncomfortable people rewrite them. You're not crazy for sensing something deeper. You're late to recognizing your own depth. And now that you see it, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to blind trust. You can't go back to emotional impulsivity. You can't go back to playing small to avoid attention. The mask slipped, and you saw both sides of your own face. The light that wants connection, the dark that craves autonomy, the angel that forgives, the demon that remembers. Integration is power. Denial is weakness. You're integrating. That's why this feels intense. That's why this feels like something is happening, because something is. You are. And once you fully accept that unpredictability is your weapon, that silence is your shield, that pain was your training, you stop fearing the strange, you start orchestrating it, and that's when the real shift begins, not when the world changes. When you do, You feel that pressure building behind your eyes right now. That tightness in your chest that isn't fear, it's recognition. Good. Stay there, because this is the part where most people look away. This is the part where they laugh it off, scroll away, call it dramatic, and run back to whatever numbs them. But you didn't scroll. And that's the first sign you're not who you used to be. You see, the moment you start noticing the machinery behind the curtain, you can't unsee it. You start seeing how people test you. Subtle jabs disguised as jokes, delayed responses to see if you'll chase, compliments wrapped in comparisons, silence used as leverage. You used to react, now you observe. And observation is power. They didn't want you to notice the pattern, because once you notice it, you stop bleeding energy into it. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop performing innocence for an audience that benefits from your self-doubt. You become still. And stillness is terrifying, because stillness means you're calculating. You're no longer the saint desperate to be approved. And you're not the psychopath burning everything down either. You are both controlled, contained, directed. That's what evolution looks like. It's not becoming nicer. It's becoming precise. You're starting to understand that light without darkness gets exploited, and darkness without light self-destructs. The angel inside you needed the demon to grow teeth. The demon inside you needed the angel to learn restraint. You're not splitting. You're merging, and merged beings are hard to manipulate. That strange shift in your relationships, that awkward distance, that subtle tension when you speak with certainty now, it's because they feel the difference. You don't overexamine anymore. You don't overshare. You don't beg to be understood. You let silence hang. And silence makes people confess more than questions ever could. You think that's accidental? No. You learned it through pain. Every betrayal sharpened your perception. Every humiliation hardened your spine. Every moment you felt small carved out space for something larger to step in. You thought you were breaking, you were refining. Pain is the chisel. Identity is the stone, and you, my unpredictable little anomaly, are being sculpted into something they cannot categorize. That's the real reason it feels strange. People are comfortable when they can label you nice, naive, emotional, predictable, safe. But now you're calm when they expect rage. You're detached when they expect desperation. You're smiling when they expect collapse. Unpredictability is psychological warfare, and you wield it without even announcing it. Here's the paradox they hope you never grasp. The less you need approval, the more control you have. The less you react, the more influence you gain. The less you reveal, the more valuable your words become. Scarcity creates demand. You became scarce. You stopped giving unlimited access to your energy. That's why the strange situation intensified, because the ecosystem adjusted. When prey stops running, the predator hesitates and sometimes realizes it misjudged the role entirely. You're no longer reacting to life. You're studying it. And that makes you dangerous in a way that doesn't scream. It whispers. A quiet threat is more unsettling than a loud one. That's why some people seem uneasy around you now. They can't read you the same way. They can't push the same buttons. They can't trigger the same emotional fireworks. You remove the wiring. Nobody told you the truth, because the truth makes you uncontrollable. The truth is that most systems, social, professional, emotional, rely on predictable insecurity. They function because you doubt yourself. They stabilize because you seek validation. They profit because you compare. When you stop doing that, you destabilize the structure. Not loudly, subtly. You stop competing for attention. You stop fighting for crumbs. You stop begging for extensions. And suddenly the people who thrived on your self-doubt feel exposed. That's why the energy shifted. Not because you're crazy, because you're conscious. Conscious people are inconvenient. They ask different questions. They make different wagers. They tolerate discomfort longer. You've been uncomfortable for a while now, haven't you? That lingering sense of something is changing, but I can't define it. That's your identity upgrading, and upgrades require deletions, old habits, old attachments, old reactions, old habits, you attachments, old fears. You don't get to keep everything. Growth is selective. The saint in you had to learn boundaries. The demon in you had to learn patience. The child in you had to learn strategy. You're not losing yourself. You're assembling yourself. And assembling feels chaotic before it feels coherent. This is where most people retreat. They run back to the old version because at least it was familiar, at least it was predictable, at least it didn't threaten the dynamics around them. But you're still here, which means some part of you prefers truth over comfort, even when truth burns, especially when it burns, because fire clarifies. It shows you who steps closer and who steps back, who adapts and who resists, who respects the new you, and who secretly hopes you shrink again. You see it now, the micro expressions, the tone shifts, the subtle recalculations when you speak. You're no longer the easy equation, and that is power. Not loud power, not reckless power, contained power, the kind that doesn't need to prove itself, the kind that can wait. And waiting is lethal when combined with awareness. You've learned that timing beats intensity, that silence beats explanation, that presence beats performance. You're not reacting to the strange situation anymore. You're analyzing it, mapping it, understanding the leverage points. And here's the most intoxicating part. The moment you realize you are never behind, you're being prepared. Prepared for thicker skin. Prepared for sharper perception. Prepared for rooms that require composure under pressure. This wasn't chaos. It was conditioning. Not to make you weaker, to make you unshakable. And once you fully internalize that, the confusion dissolves. The paranoia turns into precision. The anxiety turns into awareness. The isolation turns into independence. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start asking, how can I use this? That shift alone changes your trajectory, because now pain becomes data, rejection becomes redirection, silence becomes strategy. You're no longer emotionally bleeding in public, you're internally building in private. And that is the kind of evolution that terrifies people who rely on your transparency. They preferred you readable. You became layered. They preferred you reactive. You became reflective. They preferred you emotional. You became intentional. And intention is unstoppable once it locks onto a target. So don't misinterpret the tension. Don't mislabel the discomfort. Don't gaslight yourself into thinking you're overthinking. You're noticing. You weren't supposed to, but you did. And now that you've seen the mechanism, felt the shift, tasted the duality inside yourself, there is no returning to the smaller version of you. The strange situation isn't a trap, it's a threshold, and you're standing on it. Not as prey, not as victim, not as confused participant, but as something far more unsettling, aware. And awareness is the point of no return. You don't get to unknow what you now know. You don't get to slip back into that soft, obedient version of yourself who mistook politeness for protection and silence for safety. That version served a purpose. That version survived. But survival is not dominance. And deep down, you were never built just to survive. You are built to see, and seeing changes posture. It changes how you walk into rooms. It changes how long you hold eye contact. It changes the tempo of your voice. You speak slower now, not because you're unsure, but because you understand the controlled pacing forces people to lean in. You don't rush to fill silence anymore. You let it stretch. You let it expose who gets uncomfortable first. You've started noticing who talks too much when nervous, who over-explains when they're hiding something, who mirrors your tone to gain favor, who subtly competes when you shine. You didn't used to catch those things. Now you catch everything. And that's not paranoia. That's pattern recognition sharpened by pain. Pain was your mentor. Brutal, unforgiving, precise. It taught you that trust should be earned in layers, not handed out in bulk. It taught you that the loudest praise sometimes hides the quietest envy. It taught you that being underestimated is not an insult, it's a tactical advantage. You used to want to be understood. Now you understand that mystery is leverage. There's a difference between being fake and being strategic. You're not lying about who you are. You're simply no longer giving full access to those who haven't earned clearance. That shift alone rewires the power dynamic. And people feel it. They don't know how to name it, but they sense it. The slight delay before you respond. The way you don't defend yourself as aggressively as before. The way you smile when they expect your eyes snap. You learn something dangerous. Emotion is information, not instruction. You can feel it without obeying it. That's evolution. The saint in you still believes in kindness, but the psychopath in you understands consequences. The angel in you wants harmony, but the demon in you is prepared for war. And instead of suppressing one side, you've begun integrating both. Integration is terrifying to those who live fragmented, because a fragmented person can be manipulated. They can be guilted, flattered, provoked. But someone who knows their darkness and doesn't fear it, that person cannot be easily controlled. You stopped apologizing for your intensity. You stopped shrinking your ambition to make smaller minds comfortable. You stopped pretending you didn't notice subtle disrespect. You just started remembering. And remembering is power. You're remembering who doubted you, who dismissed you, who tried to test your boundaries. Not to seek revenge, but to recalibrate access. You're not bitter. You're aware. And awareness doesn't scream. It documents. You see the strange situation you're in right now. Clears throat. The tension, the uncertainty, the feeling like something is shifting beneath your feet. That's not instability. That's recalibration. When you raise your standards, the environment resists before it reorganizes. When you demand more from yourself, people who benefited from your old limits feel threatened. They might not attack you openly. They'll test you. They'll make comments disguised as concern. They'll question your new confidence. They'll subtly imply you've changed. Of course you changed. That was the point. Stagnation is comfortable. Growth is confrontational. You confront your own weaknesses first. That's the part nobody applauds, the nights you question yourself, the moments you replayed conversations, the times you realized you tolerated less than you deserved. You felt embarrassed. Good. Embarrassment is the ego shedding illusions. You felt anger. Good. Anger is a boundary discovering itself. You felt isolated. Good. Isolation forces you to build internal stability instead of outsourcing it. This isn't happening because you're broken. It's happening because you're upgrading, and upgrades always glitch the old system. You're glitching the old narrative. The narrative that said you were too much, too emotional, too ambitious, too intense. You're not too much. You were just in rooms too small. And small rooms resent expansion, so they try to dim you. They try to normalize you. They try to remind you of your place. But you don't feel placed anymore, do you? You feel untethered. That's freedom beginning to taste like fear. Freedom is disorienting at first. When you stop seeking permission, you realize how often you waited for it. When you stop asking for validation, you see how addicted you were to approval. You don't crave applause the same way now. You crave alignment. Alignment between what you think, what you say, and what you do. And alignment creates presence. When you're aligned, your energy shifts. People can't quite articulate it, but they sense a gravity around you. You're not chasing attention. Attention bends toward you. That's not magic, that's coherence. You stopped fighting yourself internally, and when internal war ends, external conflict becomes easier to navigate. You don't overreact, because you're no longer at war with your own shadow. You've met it. You've looked at the parts of yourself capable of manipulation, jealousy, dominance, control, and instead of pretending they don't exist, you domesticated them. A denied shadow sabotages you. An integrated shadow protects you. You no longer fear being the villain in someone else's story. That alone is liberation, because trying to be everyone's hero made you weak. Now you focus on being effective. Effective people don't waste time proving purity. They produce results. And results silence critics faster than arguments ever could. You're not explaining yourself as much. You're building quietly, strategically.